Hello, and welcome to a special edition with James Feliciano, a 20 years Japan pharmaceutical executive, former GM of AbbVie Japan, and recently CEO and founder of 3C Advisors. James has a tremendous run in Japan, a big heart for Japan and Japan's leaders, and so we're here today to tap into some of James's insights on how to become a future fit GM in Japan. James, welcome to the studio.
Thanks, Ryan. Great to be here. Very cool.
So you're well known in Japan, but for those who don't know you, tell us a little bit about you and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. I have an American passport, but I've spent close to almost 30 years now in Japan, which is kind of hard to believe. I spent a lot of my 20s here, went back, got an MBA, into the pharmaceutical industry, spent a little time at headquarters in America, and then was sent over to Japan in 2005. 4 companies later, I was a GM of AbbVie, and I did a GM stint at Merck Serono, for example. I've had a really great run in the pharmaceutical world here, and I've recently semi-retired from the corporate life and started my own company, 3C Advisors, where I focus on consulting, coaching, and connecting.
Fascinating. So now that you've had a chance to pick your head above the clouds and look at the world beyond AbbVie, you must have some fresh perspectives as to, looking back on these decades in industry and developing leaders in AbbVie. What's inspired this move to run your own consulting business, and tell us more about what you're doing?
I had a great run over those 20 plus years as a pharmaceutical executive in Japan. And then you get to a point where, well, you still want to keep going, but in a different fashion, and to kind of get out of the corporate grind and to pick and choose the projects that really matter and are of interest to me. So that was really the motivation there to start 3C Advisors. So I do a nice mix now. I do some pharmaceutical consulting. I'm the CEO of a biotech startup out of Okinawa, helping to shepherd in some new fascinating scientific innovation. I'm able to coach really high potential individuals, and through connecting, I'm able to bring people together that create good synergy, for the good of Japan. So I get to pick my projects. I get to stay busy, stay relevant, but do it kind of my way, and in projects that inspire me and motivate me.
So tell us more about the coaching of high potential leaders, because you've done a tremendous job at developing people in the companies that you've been at. And I'm curious to know, how would you see the shift from being a functional leader to being a future fit GM and having the ability to influence an entire enterprise versus a function?
Sure. Well, as you go through the stages of your career, you'll start off as, for example, a product manager, very tactical, it's filling out the forms, getting the compliance, you're learning the true building blocks of how the business happens. Then you move up to senior product manager, for example, where you're leading that team, but still very tactical, very execution focused. You're doing the brand plan. You're talking about what are the execution tactics that you're going to be doing. You move up to BUM or BUD, and that's when you start influencing people. It becomes less and less about how you're making the decisions of the business, and more how you're empowering people. And, I think as you move through that transition, and that, every step becomes a little bit harder to realize that you're actually stepping further and further away from the business. Right. And it's more about, how are you empowering your team? What kind of questions are you asking to add value for your team? I had a great conversation with a coach that I really respect. And, as you move through and get higher and higher, a good leader asks good what questions. What do you think about that? What's your next step? What's the best action we could take? As you're moving up through that process, other leaders will be much more directional or micromanaging, which is not very empowering. But you have to realize you can't do it all. And as you get higher and higher, your job is to think more about long-term strategy, vision, engagement. These are the things that really matter, and empowering the team around you, not just, letting them have, free reign at it. Of course, you're always adding value, but in a different sort of way. I think there's nothing worse than, you've got a team that's come in, they've done all this work, and they present the plan to the general manager, and then the GM says, "Oh, I don't like that color." It's not your job. Your job is not to pick the color. Your better question is, why'd you pick that color? And there should be reasons why they did, but it's not about you anymore. It's about empowering your team and understanding. So, what I learned through my journey, and also through it, having a coach of my own as a GM, and I learned so much from my coach. I realized this is something that I need to add to my toolbox. So, when you work for a good company, and luckily I did work for a very good company, they get the opportunity for training every year. And, how do you want to develop yourself as part of your management by objectives? I would always raise my hand and say, I want to take a coaching class.
Yeah.
So I took a number of coaching classes during my time at AbbVie, and I was able to then give that back to the organization through mentoring, being a co-pilot for new GMs, and also for developing, my team and my business unit directors, my new hires, and then seeing them go off to headquarters or become general managers themselves. So, very fulfilling, but, did the work and, got the training. Is very important to learn the fundamentals of it. But I think it really added a lot of value for me personally and to the people around me.
And speaking of coaching new GMs and high potential leaders that are perhaps stepping into a new role, whether that's external or internal, how important are those first 6 months in spotting those warning signs early?
Yeah, the first 6 months is critical. Actually, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about programs around that, because people enter a new role, maybe they come in from externally into a new company, and how to navigate those first 6 months. And there are a couple of elements to it, I personally, in my opinion. The first is, when you transition to that new role, what is it from your last role that you want to maybe leave behind? What are some of the learnings that you have? Because you're starting fresh. So you have an opportunity to kind of recreate yourself in a way. So spending some time in self-reflection of what was good, what should I leave behind? How should I reinvent myself in this new role? I think is a great moment for that, because you have that opportunity to come in fresh. Now, once you're there, so you're thinking about yourself through self-awareness, but then you're also assessing your team and how do I make an impact on this team? And I think you see many times, unfortunately, a leader will come in and they'll do what I call, they'll shoot first and aim later, which is very risky, because you're going to lose a lot of trust with your team. So what I always say is 80-20 rule, at least for the first month, which is 80% of the time you should be listening. And 20% of the time, you should really be asking confirmational questions and double clicking to understand more. You really shouldn't have much of an opinion in the first month or two. You should just be gathering knowledge, watching your team, looking at how they collaborate. What's the energy in the room of the team, and being an observer. It's okay. What is it? Look before you leap. And I think it really applies to, especially when you enter into a new role like that.
And of course, managing down or assessing the local team is one thing, but then there's managing up, which a lot of high potential GMs may not have had as much exposure to. So walk us through what that looks like, and what are some of the do's and don'ts of managing up and integrating with global,
especially in the first 6 months.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed, and that's another aspect of it. So we talked about self-reflection and thinking about yourself and how you want to walk into this role. You think about how you want to interact with your team, and then you also have to do kind of your stakeholder management above. That will inevitably, if you're a general manager, you'll have some sort of trip to headquarters where you're gonna make the rounds, and You have to understand, what is that stakeholder map? What are the connections? Because, and I'm not saying that it's it gets too political, but everyone has some sort of an agenda.
Sure.
So, when you do show up as a new person, representing Japan or in some sort of role, the different departments at headquarters are going to be looking for you to help their agenda in some way. And that's just the nature of the beast. That's just how it works. So how do you establish a good collaborative relationship with your stakeholders? How do you understand how things connect? And you have to spend time on that. You have to really think about it. You have to write it down, kind of map it out, and remember what you hear and take notes. So I also try to think about that with my clients as well, that element of stakeholder management for those above.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like what are their priorities? And you just do the kind of the same listening tour. What I do, I mean, if you want to really double click, what I really do is I suggest ask the same question of all of those in all of those meetings, so that you can kind of hear different people's answers, their versions of how they approach that question.
Okay, so you assess the team, you go on a sort of listening tour at headquarters, and you ask these questions consistently. When's the right time to present that 90-day plan or the 6-month, first 6 months plan?
Sure. I think a big part of it is working with your manager and really understanding what their priorities are as well. There may be some major burning platforms that need to be dealt with immediately. So, when you enter into a new role, what are the hot button issues that need to happen quickly? That's what we can take leadership. Other things, you want to build a coalition. You want to make sure that you're going to be speaking something that's relevant to your team. So, we were just talking about, you can't just walk in and say, hey, new rising sun 5-year plan, here we go, without really understanding what the elements are that need to be a part of that. I'm a big believer in co-creation. I think you're really doing yourself a disservice if you come in a leadership role like that and don't spend some time with your team in some sort of an offsite or some sort of a team building exercise to really connect, to show that what kind of a leader are you? And that, do you want to be a collaborative leader? You want to be an empowering leader? You want to co-create together? And, having those kind of seminal moments where, you're out of the office, spending time together in a meaningful way, and you're defining what high-performing team will look like in this new situation.
Yeah.
Co-creating that, I think is critical. I'm a huge believer in offsites, at least once a year with your team, to reconnect, to just rethink things, to look at where you are versus where you've come and where you want to go, and really aligning on that.
And a lot of the new GMs these days are living in an increasingly matrix organization. You have cross-functional teams,
Indeed,
a mix of dotted and solid report lines. They're changing every month, it seems. So help us imagine a little bit more. What does that look like? What does an effective offsite look like practically? How do you get everyone aligned so that your boss doesn't hear about something for the first time through someone else? Yeah,
indeed. I think that's really the key of spending time like that. You are in the matrix. People have different reporting lines into headquarters, but you still represent Japan, and you still represent that affiliate. And that's your ultimate goal is the advancement of the affiliate and the people who work there, and that business there in pharma for Japanese patients, right? How can we excel and accelerate that? When you're in that sort of offsite meeting, you kind of come back to that moment and you recommit to that we do have various bosses, and it's a big, tangled web, but ultimately this is why we're here. Let's align on that. And this is how we're going to work together. This is how we're going to share information. And you agree on, the rules of the road. You can't just assume that. You cannot assume how you're going to collaborate. You have to explicitly talk about it and commit to it and really understand that this is a weakness of ours. This is a blind spot of ours. This is where we need to improve. So like bringing in, I think, an external consultant to help to do that diagnostic with your team, to get the feedback, and then to, as a group, to co-create together how you want to work together moving forward. Easier said than done. If you go through the right steps, you can do it in an incredible way. And then as a leader, as the new GM, you now have the blueprint in front of you, and everyone's agreed to it. So instead of you saying, this is how we're going to do it, this is, we've decided to do this.
Right.
And then that gives you a great opportunity to see who is truly on the bus.
Yeah.
Right? Because everyone's agreed, right? And look, you don't have to be on the bus. You know, we've talked about this before. I'm a big believer in this. You know, Japan's unemployment rate is very, very, very low.
Yeah.
There are plenty of places to go. But you're setting the direction. You're setting the rules of the road. You know, you've all agreed to it. If someone doesn't want to be part of that, they're welcome to go. You know, and Marshall Goldsmith says that so eloquently. He says, we love you and we wish you all the best.
Yeah.
You know, it's okay. No hard feelings, but this is where we're going.
So for the future leaders out there who have the attitude to become a GM, but maybe not the aptitude yet, from your perspective, where are those biggest blind spots, and what can future leaders do today to reflect on themselves to become a future fit GM?
I would say, you know, if you're aspiring to be a general manager, really think about, how am I empowering my team? You know, do I ask good what questions of my team? You know, do I challenge them, or am I just giving direction? Am I just being a boss? Do this, do that. Have you done that? You know, are you a dictator, or are you asking good what questions like, what do you think is the next best step? What are you going to do next year? What's the overview of this market situation? You know, you're putting the challenge to them to own that. So what's your leadership style? You know, really understanding that. And there are so many wonderful diagnostics that are out there that you can even do for free,
Right.
where you can just really understand, you know, what are my strengths? And what's very interesting is you can have a strength, but if it's overexpressed, it can actually become a weakness. So having that self-awareness of kind of what your style is, getting some feedback, getting 360 feedback is a gift, because that's where you really see your blind spots. You know, in your mind, you think you're a great leader. The numbers are good, but, you know, whatever the case may be, but maybe underneath that calm of that lake, maybe there's some, you know, your team is like, wow, the way this guy does this, you know, this is not fun at all.
Yeah.
You know, and that could maybe not show up. That could easily be a blind spot. So doing some diagnostics, understanding your style, and doing some self-assessment of, am I the most empowering and the best leader that I could be?
And of course, it's not just self-awareness, but it's situational awareness, dealing with different types of people, from HR to finance or IT. Give us a little insight into how to adapt one's leadership style to different, you know, functions of the organization, different personalities.
Sure, absolutely. I think, you know, you're always representing your group, your team, but you always have to remember that there's a larger company initiative, a company ethos that has to be respected. So how are you representing both your function, but thinking about the larger group as well? And how are you latching onto, and how are you supporting the larger corporate initiative? And I think really demonstrating those, you know, really good companies have ways of working, or they have their values that are, a lot of thought has been put into those. And that's the corporate values that come down from headquarters. How are you living those? Because that's what the company's asking of you. So, you know, do you demonstrate those values consistently with anyone you're talking to? You know, I don't think that the company values are lip service. I think they really matter. And I think we need to spend time thinking about every day, am I showing up on these values? And that's what's supposed to be the glue that holds all of these different departments together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something we hear from emerging leaders often is balancing giving authentic praise and being a multiplier with also not shortchanging people on critical feedback.
Yes.
What's your advice on how to approach those kinds of conversations, being a multiplier and also giving constructive feedback?
So I think both need to be very precise. I'm not a very big believer in like just broad platitudes of great job. When I give praise, I like to be very specific about what I saw that I liked and what really made a difference, so that that person can know where they can keep raising the volume. So, hey, great job on that presentation. I love how you gave a really strong market overview and then really linked it to the current issues that we're having and where, you know, our focus needs to be. That arc was very clear to me. That's really meaningful praise. Great presentation says nothing.
Right.
In the same way, criticism, feedback, let's call it's feedback. As you know, where I see what you're doing, I understand what your goal is here. Maybe if you think about doing this, it will result in this. So you give them kind of not just, hey, can you stop? Blah, blah, blah. You know, it's how you phrase it that leads them to an outcome, and saying, if you think about this, maybe this is the outcome you'll get, which will probably serve you and the team better.
Right.
You know, open it up and explain the why of it, and explain, you know, how that's going to link to something that is a win-win for people. So I think, you know, in short, both for praise and also giving feedback, it's about giving the plus alpha of why it matters, and not just sticking with being too broad about it.
Yeah. I also know you're very passionate about helping Japan to become an exporter of talent.
Indeed.
What does that mean, and why is that important?
Well, I've just always felt like Japanese team members are just underrepresented at headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
For considering the size of the market globally and the importance of Japan to the international business. The number of Japanese seems to have always been underrepresented when you compare to Europeans or Latin Americans, or, you know, even we're seeing a lot more Chinese but Japanese always tend to be underrepresented to me. So, you know, what I've been trying to do, and what's one of my missions now is being a coach here in Japan, is to help Japanese talent really stand up and demonstrate and show those attributes that resonate with headquarters more. You know, I think Japanese in general have a tendency to not kind of, you know, beat their drum a little bit and talk about, you know, their how they're adding value. You know, sell yourself, right? You know, your book, Sell Yourself Like a CEO. We have to sell ourselves. We have to manage upwards. You know, we have to be aware of how we can add value and talk about that and propose it proactively. And I think a lot of Japanese talent don't have that skill or as much as they need to have. So, you know, it's one of my goals. I want to just keep seeing talent get exported out of Japan and into headquarters, because the talent here is really good. You know, I think the caliber of work, the attention to details, the understanding of the markets, and the diligence that and the pre-work that Japanese professionals do adds a lot of value. It just doesn't get seen. We need to make that more visible.
Yeah. And it is a country where we have a saying, the nail that's standing out will get hammered down.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're not really used to it.
In your experience, what's the reframe for Japanese leaders to reframe that selling yourself into how they can, you know, be more vocal and assertive on the global stage?
Well, I mean, look, I think one of the things, and it's a little bit of tough love, and I think it's, you know, you've chosen to work for a global company. You've chosen to work for a company that is headquartered in the United States or headquartered in Europe. There's a culture there that defines that company. You have to adapt into it. You have to plug in to, that American culture, if you will. Again, if you don't like it, you can work for a Japanese company, and that's fine, but you have to recognize that you have chosen this road, which means you have to bring out elements that resonate within that culture. It's just, like anything, it's almost like a language. If you want to be seen and heard in that language, you got to speak that language. Look, Shakespeare said all the world's a stage. Right? We're always kind of acting. We're always, we're changing who we are for the moment of who we're interacting with or where we are. I'm a very different person as the CEO of a company than I am as a coach in a room or with my friends on a Friday night. There are various versions of ourselves. You have to understand what is the version of you that you want to be in that corporate setting, and then build the skills to be that person.
So what I'm hearing today is, one, ask more what questions.
Ask more what questions. Amen.
Then you talk. Two, not just master managing down, but managing up.
Indeed.
As well. And three, tune into who you are and who you want to be, the best version of you.
I think the last one really matters a lot. And that's one of the beauties of coaching. One of the values, I think, is really assessing who you are right now and kind of who you want to be. Mm-hmm. And by modeling off of leaders that you respect, for example, and then understanding, well, where are my gaps? And then what do I need to do to fill in that gap? Coaching is not about, I have this problem, what should I do? There's an element of that. But the real value in coaching is to say, here I am now, and this is where I want to go. How do I get there? What behaviors do I need to demonstrate? I always tell my clients, my coaching clients, that everything is about behaviors. Everything is about new actions that people can see, right? I can say in my mind, I'm going to be, the best leader ever, but I don't actually do things that my team can see. So then I haven't changed at all. Right? It's all about actually measurable behaviors. Yes or no, binary. Did I do this? Yes or no. Was I more proactive today? Yes or no. How? I raised my hand and gave 2 comments in the meeting, whereas 2 months ago, I was giving no comments. That's measurable.
Very black and white.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
tiny changes.
Yes. I'm a real stickler for that. And I send my clients an email every Friday and say, tell me how you did, because we're trying to measure behavioral change.
Yeah. And of course, not everyone has exposure to creating a 5-year plan and a quantitative set of goals. But I also know you carve out a lot of time for really visualizing the future, painting a picture of success and who you want to be. What does that look like?
Personally?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a routine that I do every year. In the first 2 weeks of January, I go off to an undisclosed island location by myself and go to a yoga place and do yoga, eat clean, and spend time reflecting and thinking about, where have I come from? Where am I going? And I do have my 5-year plan. I do have a 10-year plan, but I also have that 1 year. What do I want to accomplish this year?
Yeah.
I just check in with myself.
Yeah.
And I write it down. And, one of a dear coach of mine, he taught me how you draw kind of a picture of it. So you don't use words. You actually draw the picture.
Yeah.
And I have a book, and I have all of my pictures from year to year, and you can see these threads that are really pulling through my life. Yeah. So just spending some time in self-reflection.
It's amazing how that activates more of our brain and our instinct, and intuition that we can't put into words.
Exactly. When you're drawing a picture, you can see it, right? And you can imagine it. And that's very powerful. It's kind of a neuralistic NLP, neuro-linguistic programming methodology of seeing yourself in the room, what color's the carpet, sort of thing. But it really helps you to visualize and to start thinking about a path to get there. It's very, very powerful.
And now that you've had a change of scenery, you're advising several companies, very innovative companies. Tell us a little bit more about that and what's next for you.
Yeah, I mean, what's next is this. I'm really enjoying it. It's interesting because I drew this picture a few years ago, and it's actually really coming to fruition. I've got this really exciting portfolio of both consulting as well as coaching, and it's a really nice balance. Every day is enjoyable, exciting, and I feel like I'm giving back. Really couldn't be happier, and just how do I keep contributing to the Japanese pharmaceutical world, to bringing more innovation to Japanese patients and to helping talent thrive here in Japan. Both Japanese talent as well as expats coming in, helping them to avoid some common pitfalls and mistakes and to add value quickly. Because for us in this industry in pharma, it's all about ultimately, we're here for the patients.
Yeah.
And the better that we do our job, the more impact it has on patients. So I'm just doing that. I'm continuing that theme of my life, just doing it in a little bit of a different way now.
Yeah. So last question, a call to action to global leaders who are managing Japan and a call to action to the future leaders of Japan.
Call to action to those who are managing Japan from headquarters per se.
Yes.
Ask what questions to them, push them, and don't overlook them for maybe a more charismatic, Brazilian. I mean, because nothing against Brazilians, but I think there's a lot of, still waters run deep, is something I like to say about Japanese talent. So don't overlook. There's a big investment there that will really pay off. And I think for my call to action for Japanese talent is, you have chosen to work for this, gaishike foreign company. What's their language? Plug into that and, reinvent yourself and really look to lean into what headquarters is looking for. I think it's important to say you don't necessarily need the company to lean into your Japaneseness. You should lean into your international, because especially when you're going to headquarters, it's an international environment. So you really need to show that you can swim in those waters. So you have to rise up. You have to spend some time thinking about where you need to improve. Raise your hands for stuff. Get on global committees on things. Represent Japan. Be proactive.
James, it's always a pleasure.
Ryan, thanks so much.